Someone like Epstein, and with the financial history of Epstein, his interest arguably in cryptocurrency is to continue to engage in the same criminal and bad financial behavior that he had done for the decades prior.
When most people hear the name Jeffrey Epstein, they think of one thing first: the trafficking scandal, the abuse, the blackmail allegations, the elite social network, the intelligence questions. But what if that is still not the full picture? What if one of the most disturbing parts of the Epstein story is not just who he knew in politics, not just who he knew in media, not just who he knew in finance, but who he was positioned around in the early crypto world? Because once you start pulling on that thread, the story gets deeply uncomfortable. Not because it proves some lazy internet fantasy, not because it means Epstein invented Bitcoin. He didn't, and there's no evidence for that. But because it suggests that Epstein was once again orbiting a space that would go on to shape the future of money, digital infrastructure, and financial control. Let's clear something up right away. The dumbest version of this story is the viral fake post version. The idea that Epstein was secretly Satoshi Nakamoto, or that one fake email proves he created Bitcoin. That story falls apart immediately. There is no evidence for it. So if you want to understand why this is actually terrifying, you have to move past the fake stuff and look at the real issue. Epstein didn't need to invent a system in order to get close to it. His pattern, over and over again, was insertion. He inserted himself into spaces of emerging power: finance, science, politics, elite philanthropy, technology. And what makes crypto so important is that it was never just a niche tech hobby. It was always about future control over financial rails, settlement systems, influence, and global money architecture. What makes this so dark is not simply that Epstein touched crypto, it's where he touched it. Public reporting says Epstein invested $3 million in Coinbase in 2014 during its early growth stage. He also invested in Blockstream, one of the major Bitcoin infrastructure firms, through a fund connected to Joy Ito. And communications tied Epstein's money to MIT Media Lab's digital currency initiative, the project described in one email chain as helping underwrite a principal home and funding source for Bitcoin development. That is not random exposure. That is proximity to foundational infrastructure, serious capital, and elite gatekeeping around digital finance. And that changes the feeling of the story, because now you're not just looking at Epstein as a predator with rich friends, or you're looking at him as someone who kept appearing around systems that later became strategically important. And if you followed this story for any length of time, that pattern should make you stop. Because he did not just collect people, he collected nodes of influence.
And in the case of Brock Pierce and Epstein, this happened after his first arrest. And Pierce has said that all of his conversations with Epstein were related directly to the meeting. And Pierce has said that all of his conversations with Epstein were related directly to cryptocurrency.
One of the most revealing parts of this story is the Brock Pierce angle. Pierce reportedly brokered Epstein's Coinbase investment. He was also a co-founder of Tether, which later became one of the biggest and most systemically important entities in the crypto economy. Now pause there, because this is where the story stops sounding like coincidence and starts sounding like a familiar Epstein pattern. Find the emerging field, get close to key connectors, use access to move into the room early, and position yourself where future power is forming. And again, or to stay responsible here, being named in communications or investment records does not automatically mean wrongdoing by everybody involved. That's not the claim. The disturbing part is the recurring access. The same man who had no business being anywhere near so many powerful circles somehow kept showing up exactly where power was about to concentrate next. There's another piece here that should really bother people. Emails reported in the press show Epstein's townhouse being used as a place where Brock Pierce discussed Bitcoin with former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. Think about what that represents. That is not fringe crypto culture. That is not anonymous cypherpunk idealism. That is an elite salon environment where emerging digital money is already in contact with old establishment power. And that may be the most important insight in the whole story. Epstein appears again not merely as a participant, but as a connector, a bridge, a broker of access between legacy institutions and emerging systems. That has always been one of the darkest recurring themes around him. Not just what he did personally, but how often he appeared to function as a social and financial switchboard for people who mattered. If you care about Bitcoin because you care about freedom, privacy, decentralization, and getting away from captured institutions, then this story should not make you shrug. It should make you more serious. Because one of the big risks in crypto has always been the illusion that a decentralized technology automatically stays socially decentralized. It doesn't. Technology can be decentralized on paper while capital, influence, and narrative control still get concentrated in the hands of a few gatekeepers. And what this story suggests is that even in crypto's early years, the old pattern may already have been there. Elite networking, private money, backroom introductions, and access flowing through the same kind of circles that shaped everything else. That's why this should not be framed as just gossip around a disgraced financier. So this is about whether a supposedly liberating financial system was being socially colonized from the very beginning by people and networks deeply tied to the old one.
I think we've moved away from the type of model that Epstein used for sexual blackmail. It's an era of electronic blackmail, and you don't even have to do anything wrong. They can just plant it on your devices and play gotcha that way. So it's really an unprecedented situation. And a lot of these intelligence agencies, as I note in the book, really for decades have been totally out of control. And, I really start off the book talking about how intelligence agencies and organized crime in the U.S. got in bed together, and really that symbiosis, it was originally justified out of wartime necessity during World War II.
Fighting the Nazis.
But it never stopped, right?
Right.
And it's, business is business. And some of these people in our own national security state, realized they could make a lot of money working with organized crime and really shielding them and getting in on the spoils, I guess you could say. I think the FBI has been compromised from the very beginning. In the book, I talk a lot about J. Edgar Hoover. He was blackmailed by the mob. He realized the power blackmail had, started using blackmail himself. And, increasingly the FBI, and I think it's very obvious to a lot of conservatives now, comes in to cover things up and to, go after, figures that they, don't want to advance in their careers or, any sort of thing. It's very complicated. So what do we do as a country when, there needs to be massive investigations of all sorts of stuff, Jeffrey Epstein being one, and, the government is increasingly incapable of investigating itself, especially when you're looking at the FBI or something.
The deeper reason this story feels so disturbing is because it fits a larger pattern. For years, people looked at Epstein only through the narrowest lens possible. Sex scandal, celebrity scandal, tabloid scandal. But the bigger question has always been power. How power is built, how power is protected, how networks of influence operate across finance, technology, academia, intelligence, and politics. And once you look at crypto through that lens, the Epstein connection stops being bizarre and starts being coherent. Of course, a figure like Epstein would be interested in emerging digital finance. Of course, he would want proximity to the infrastructure of the future. Of course, he would try to get close to the people building, funding, and legitimizing the next monetary layer. Because if your real game is influence, leverage, and insertion into strategic systems, then crypto would not be a side hobby. It would be an obvious target. One of the ugliest parts of this whole thing is the legitimacy layer. MIT Media Lab accepted money tied to Epstein over many years, and reporting says his money helped underwrite the launch of the Digital Currency Initiative. That matters because it shows how reputational laundering can work. A tainted figure doesn't walk into a room and say, "I am here to corrupt the future." He arrives through donations, through introductions, through elite trust networks, through institutions people assume are above that kind of contamination. And by the time the public sees the pattern, the money has already moved, the relationships already exist, and the infrastructure is already being built. So no, the real story is not that Epstein secretly invented Bitcoin. The real story is more disturbing than that. It's that he appears to have been close enough to early crypto networks, companies, institutions, and gatekeepers to leave fingerprints on the edge of a system that many people hoped would free them from exactly this kind of power. And that should force a much harder question. If people like Epstein were circling crypto that early, then how much of the future of money was really independent, and how much of it was being shaped from the start by the same elite networks people thought they were escaping? Let me know in the comments. Do you think crypto escaped the old system, or do you think the old system got there first?